Thanks again
All
for
right.
coming to Family Partnership's final workshop of the year. We are here with JP Ouellette again. He was so wonderful last time that when he offered to do another one, I said, yes, please, please. So he's here to talk about conflict at home. So I'm going to hand it over to JP. But thank you, JP, for sharing with us. I'm excited to learn.
It's my pleasure. I love it. And I love that you guys are here. Conflict is one of those things that typically draws people. Well, not conflict itself. Most people want to walk away from conflict, but learning about conflict is something that is just, I think, common to the human experience. It's like, what is this, and how do we do it better? I'm JP Ouellette. I'm the owner and operator of Peacemaking Partners, and my extreme sport is awkward situations. So that's where that's where my gifting is. And in short, the mission and vision of Peacemaking Partners is to walk alongside Alaskan communities and community members, families, businesses, individuals, and be a catalyst and a conduit for learning and growth in the areas of how well-navigated conflict can really lead to a fulfilling life. And our tendency is to avoid it at all costs. We have an idea that peace is the absence of conflict. And so really we just make a really passive aggressive society that has a hard time being innovative when that's our status quo. So tonight we're going to specifically talk about conflict at home. And I hear there were lots of questions about specific areas of conflict, like between siblings or between spouses or between parents and siblings. And we can for sure do workshops on more specific topics in the future. What I'm going to do tonight is kind of an overview of conflict and lay a foundation for what we could discuss further in the future, and some really awesome principles to apply toward all of those different types of scenarios. And if you have questions or comments at any time, you can put them in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself. If we had a room of 100 people, I might not offer that, but it's just us. We're cool. I like this little group. So feel free to interrupt me. And all right, that's me. We're over it. Okay, so what we're going to talk about tonight: why conflict can be so draining. Is it just me, or does everybody else kind of, even thinking about conflict, does it kind of make you tired? Like, again, really? Are we going to have this conversation again with the same outcome? Because we already know where this is going. Can we just skip it and either cry or go our separate ways? Just get right to the tears. So we're going to talk about how to overcome the notion that conflict has to be draining. It is work, but it doesn't have to always lead to, in fact, it doesn't have to ever lead to unfruitfulness. And we're going to talk about some tools there. We'll cover some practical application and some additional resources and opportunities to engage successfully in conflict. So if you've had a busy day, I just want to give you this opportunity to be quiet for 20 seconds and just take a deep breath. And let it out. And watch the busy day kind of just fade away for 45 minutes that we have together. It's amazing. Our lives, especially the last couple of years, I think, have been so full of conflict because of all the added variables and shifting on a dime for this situation and that situation. When I do this exercise and I just give people a few minutes of space to be quiet, I know I went down and I was working with somebody in Sitka, and it was a social worker. And the first thing I did, they came in and to talk to me about a million different things, and I said, you know what? Have you had a chance to just be quiet today? And we just sat there, and she just started weeping because, oh my goodness, I have feelings. And today's been really hard. So thank you for indulging me in that little exercise. It was probably insufficient to really process, but just take a moment. Don't forget to take a moment and breathe. So that's me. When I was a little tyke, somewhere in Montana, I think it was probably Missoula. That's where I grew up as a kid. That's my dad giving me fashion tips. My dad was actually John Travolta, and that's you can see my response to my dad's fashion tips. Dad, I don't think you get this. I'm not sure. I don't remember why I put that picture in there. but here I am now, all grown up. Woohoo. And this is what all of our families look like, right? We're just all around the dinner table, smiles. Mom's wearing the pilgrim hat and the turkey. I know we're a ways away from Thanksgiving, but look at how happy we can all just relate to that because that's what dinner looks like every night in my home. And then I actually did take a picture of what dinner looks like in my home post COVID. It could sometimes feel more like this. And guess what? They're still a happy family. All right. So you can type in the chat what kind of ongoing, perpetual, and you don't have to if you don't want to be vulnerable, but what kind of unending arguments do you tend to have in your home? Or you can say it out loud. I put the mask or no mask in as kind of a joke, but I've heard that that's actually can be a really point of contention in some homes, especially right now. So I know these are examples of things we talk about in my home. Oh, there's more. Well, they just keep popping up. Well, let's go back. There's just stuff coming out of the woodwork here. Electronics, in-laws, boyfriends, finances, bedtimes, chores, home improvements, travel. And that was just the last half hour before this workshop. So can't wait to see what happens later. But these are all real things, and some of them more trivial than others, some of them weightier than others. But they're all real things we have to deal with every day. And my home has, at any given time, has 10 people in it, 10 different personalities, all navigating 10 different times in life. And any one of these things can feel incredibly life-changing, especially electronics. You start taking away electronics, you realize um, you've just sentenced somebody to death for probably the rest of their life because they don't have their phone.
And JP, another thing from the chat
Yeah.
was schoolwork. And I think that as homeschoolers, that's a unique battle we
Oh
all
man.
have. So I just wanted to mention that because whoever said that, we're all battling the schoolwork battle at some point during the year.
Right? Yeah, and when the rest of ASD had to start teaching their kids at home and they were freaking out, homeschool parents were like, right? Now you get it. This is real. Yeah, I know. Homework, my kids are in school and homework is still like, oh my gosh, really? I can't imagine. I can't imagine all day, every day homework and me having to be the one to figure out what homework is. I'm just props to you guys because I ain't doing it. You guys are awesome. And my wife and I talk about that every day because she's one of the sponsor teachers. I'm like, you get to provide support for parents to break away from the system and do education the way it was designed, the way it was intended to be. It, you, to have parents lead their children, which is so difficult, but so rewarding when your kids are both, they're getting an education and they're getting it from their parents. And I don't know, I could go on forever. That's not what we're talking about tonight, but I'm really impressed with you guys and grateful. So those are all the different things we talk about. Why are those things so challenging to us? And if you were in the last workshop where we were talking about ACEs, some of these things are going to be familiar. So here's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He was a really famous psychologist, I want to say back in the 50s. And he came up with this idea that we have these basic physiological needs, all of us do. We have, and then once we're like fed and watered and we've been taken out to go to the bathroom, then safety is an issue. Um, and then love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. So most of us in our American environment, and the fact that you are on a computer and accessing Zoom right now, my presumption is that your physiological needs and your safety needs are met. If not, you need to figure that out before you come back to the computer. Feel free to break away and find a safe space to Zoom. Um, but no, seriously, these needs are being met. And so where we find ourselves is that next step, love and belonging. And that is where conflict hits home, because conflict is about love and belonging. And we could drill down to that. We don't have time tonight, but when you start to dissect every single conflict that we engage in, you will get down to love and belonging. You'll get down to, at what point in this conflict did I start to protect my sense of being lovable or being accepted or belonging or being respected? That's all in that yellow level of our basic needs. And that is right where the heart of conflict is. So last time we talked about three basic principles. The first one being fear versus love. So when we're engaging with our spouses, we're engaging with our children, we're engaging with our coworkers, are we responding in fear, or are we responding in love for our neighbor, love for our family members? Those two things will compete with each other, and they will absolutely change our ability to process information and our ability to think through what it is we actually are trying to get at. Because how many times have you been in a conflict? And we'll touch more specifically on this later. How many times have you been in a conflict and what you're arguing about has nothing to do with what you're upset about? I I will have red curtains. I will have red curtains, and that becomes like, I'm not ending this day until I get my damn red curtains acknowledged. And it's really not about red curtains. It's about, I just want you to say it's okay for you to like red curtains. I just want someone to say it's okay for you to have an opinion, or it's okay for you to disagree with zebra curtains, whatever. Um, so fear versus love. Um, Sometimes we're just afraid that we are not going to be seen as lovable, so we fight for that. Second one is judgment versus curiosity. Am I coming into this situation already having preconceived notions of what the other person's thinking, what they're intending? Like, I think a great one is with my kids. My 3-year-old especially is where I can see my greatest folly. You did that just to tick me off. Because my 3-year-old is so sophisticated, but she's just sitting around thinking of ways to tick daddy off. Of course not. Of course that's not what she's doing. But in my insanity, if I come with judgment versus curiosity, I've already decided that you deserve to be punished because you're doing that on purpose. You're making me mad on purpose. That's judgment. Curiosity says, I wonder what's going on here. Or even asking, even a 3-year-old, hey, what's going on here? What do you need? What would you like? Do you have a question? Do you really think you should be poking the cat with a fork? Why would you do that? Do you like being scratched? And the third one, and I'm not elaborating as much on these as I did last time because we spent a big bulk of the workshop on it last time. So feel free to go back and review the last workshop. Confusion versus confidence. And that's something that I'm hoping today's workshop and the ones that we do going forward will help with. Right now, conflict for most of us can be incredibly confusing. And my aim is to demystify conflict so that we can walk into these situations with confidence. And one of the ways we build that confidence is by navigating conflict successfully. And Katrina and I were talking about before this, you come into many situations with more confidence when you can remember times where those situations turned out well. And so the more we courageously engage in conflict with the tools that we're going to talk about tonight, the more we build our confidence and the less we tend to get jacked in the head just thinking about a situation. And we walk into it going, I've been here before. This is probably going to get a little intense, but we're going to get there. We always do. We always will. And that's one thing I'd love to encourage you with is that once you start doing this, you'll start feeling more comfortable in saying, you know what? We always figure it out. So I'm going to move forward with that presumption that we will figure it out. So when you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you see that these three principles play out. Fear versus love in that stage of our need to be loved and to belong. So when we're operating in fear, not only are we kind of rejecting the love from our family members, because oftentimes we can be in fear, our family members are trying to be loving, but we're stepping outside of the love and the grace and the favor we might otherwise enjoy because we're just insistent in our own minds, well, I'm not lovable and I got to prove this or I got to prove that. And we even reject what's being offered to us sometimes. Stepping up, we see judgment versus curiosity and that sense of esteem for ourselves and esteem for others. Are we coming in already having this preconceived judgment of ourselves and preconceived judgment of others, like, oh gosh, I suck at conflict, this is going to go poorly, or that person hates me, that person doesn't like me, that this isn't going to go well. Or just curiosity, I wonder how we're going to get through this. We're two adults, or we're a parent and a child, or we've been married for this long and we said for better or for worse, so that's what it's going to be. And I wonder how we're going to get through this, because we will. I'm curious how. And then at the very top, self-actualization, which is where for many years, psychologists said that no one ever actually reaches that. That's just what we're striving for. And I would disagree. But that's where confusion versus confidence comes in. When you're confused, you never really get to the point where you feel like you're driving your own life. You're just being led by emotions and responses and moving from one drama to the next, one urgent need to the next. And versus having the time and the space and the mental capacity to be confident about where you're going and deciding this day I'm going to do that. And I even anticipating conflict, saying this is what I'm going to achieve today in this conflict, and it's going to be fruitful. I won't allow otherwise. But we can't do that if we're in fear and confusion and judgment. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So this should look familiar. If this doesn't stress you out already, this is your brain on conflict. And briefly, what this is, it's a picture of a phenomenon we call the amygdala hijack. So our amygdala is designed to keep us from getting eaten by a bear and eaten by a dinosaur, which we don't have dinosaurs anymore. So in Alaska, we have bears. In Kentucky, we had snakes. And amygdala was really helpful in me staying away from snakes. So what happens is, over time, when we aren't trained to see conflict correctly, to see conflict as something actually positive and normal and helpful, our amygdala starts to take over and see every little conflict as a threat. So you see, step one, you get sensory data. Step two, right to the amygdala. Step three, to the cortex. Step four, threat assessment. And then I can't see step five. My Zoom's kind of weird. Oh, yeah, amygdala blocks slow thinking. Slow thinking is absolutely what you need when you're in conflict. The amygdala says, this is a bear, pull the trigger or run. Pull the trigger. And how many times have you been in an argument with your spouse or your children or your boss or your sponsor teacher or somebody, and you're thinking, I've got two responses here. Either I take control or I get out of this meeting. And that's because your amygdala is telling you you're in danger, you're in danger, you're in danger. Something is at risk here. And it's usually our ego. And our ego, and I say that not to be flippant, our ego is really the core of our being, our soul. And our ego has been trained to feel a sense of death when it's being threatened. So our amygdala starts to be trained to think of conflict as just as much of a threat as a bear on the path. And so, yeah, I won't beat that any longer than I need to, but just know that that's what's happening in our brains. You can start to feel sweaty palms, sometimes just thinking about a certain person or a certain situation, or for years for me, bedtime. When bedtime came up, even if my kids were angels, I was ticked off already by the time bedtime come up, because I had already decided I hate bedtime. I am tired of fighting these kids every single night to go to bed. And I'd already created the situation that I dreaded. And it's because my amygdala was saying, bear, 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 bear. Go up there with a gun and start killing whatever is keeping your life from being peaceful. And it wasn't until, I don't remember when it changed, to just decide, you know what, maybe if I don't come into this situation all jacked up, they might not respond the same way, because really our kids' responses are a reflection of our own brains. They're looking to us to go, how do I behave in this situation? What does this situation really look like? And so if what we are projecting to them is danger, 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 then they grow up thinking conflict is dangerous and avoid it at all costs. And in today's culture, when people would much rather say something to each other on Facebook than go out for a cup of coffee and deal with something, we perpetuate that. We perpetuate the lack. We perpetuate the increasing fear of engaging another human being in confrontation, when that's actually where the best relationships are built and trust is built. Okay, so important things to remember about conflict. Conflict is not the beginning of the end. For folks who, I think for children of divorced families, oftentimes, which is more and more prevalent these days, including my own children, they start to see that conflict and confrontation is only going to lead to the death of something. Because that's what I witnessed with my parents. And so they already have data to tell them conflict is dangerous and should be avoided. When probably 90% of the time, the reason that happened is because that's what we as parents felt like. So we never dealt with conflict. And then it was too late by the time we did. And it's perpetuated. But now we're going to teach our kids something different. Conflict is not the beginning of the end. Conflict is not abnormal. Your family is not abnormal if your kids fight. Your family is not abnormal if you, every now and then you think about getting the duct tape out, but you don't really want to tell anybody that. Your family's not abnormal if you and your spouse had a shouting match. That's not abnormal. In fact, I remember a counselor one time saying that if you really love each other, then you're actually going to hurt one another. Because if it's not okay, and you're not going to hurt each other on purpose, but if you're so afraid of hurting each other that you can't be you, then you're not really sure if that other person loves you. So if you really are in a relationship of loving and being loved, then there's grace when you mess up, and you will hurt each other. So it's not abnormal. It's not a sign of failing relationships. To have conflict is not a sign that you're failing. In fact, conflict is one of the only and probably the quickest, well-navigated conflict is the quickest road to a great relationship. When I work with people who say we don't have any conflict, and this is marriages or organizations even, we don't have any conflict, I'm like, you've never really talked to anybody. What you've done is you've squelched all opposing ideas and nobody's allowed to talk about it, because conflict doesn't have to be everybody fighting. Conflict is just a divergence of ideas. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Conflict is not a reason to move on. It's not a reason to quit. It's not a reason to give up. So that's what conflict is not. Let's talk about what conflict is. Conflict is an opportunity. It's one of those things that you can say, oh, thank you for this conflict, this opportunity today to have a better relationship. It's an opportunity to learn the joy of real love. And oftentimes what I'd say to my families when I'm working with them is that happiness, real love emerges when quote unquote happiness is fleeting. When it's not easy to be happy around each other, then you start to experience what it really means to love each other. Because to love someone requires that they need love, right? To love someone requires that you sacrifice some piece of yourself to be patient, to be kind, to be merciful, to be giving, to be generous. People don't need those things when they're perfect. They don't need you to be patient, kind, merciful, or generous when they're perfect. So you really can't love someone who's perfect. And someone can't love you if you're perfect. So it's really the oftentimes the most unlikable moments that provide the opportunity to love and be loved, which is kind of upside down thinking for most of us, but it's true. And conflict is an opportunity to get the most out of life. When we avoid conflict, we just skim the surface with our relationships. And we're afraid to go deeper because who knows what's under there? Who knows what's under the surface? But I can promise you that as much scary things may be under the surface, there's more beautiful things under the surface. And to be human and to love and be loved requires that we navigate conflict and mine the beauty out of life by being willing to navigate some of the ugliness together, because we're human beings. And like I said a minute ago, loving and being loved actually requires us to be imperfect. So there's a thing that I call the cycle of conflict. And there are a few different models of this out there. This is the one I like the best. And I'll go over this briefly: desire, demand, judgment, and action. This is what happens when we engage in conflict. And this is actually what happens when we engage in conflict and our amygdala is in control. So it starts with the desire. Nothing wrong with the desire. And I'll give a silly example of, I'll say my desire is to be a good, loving husband and have a good relationship with my wife. So I come home after a long day of work and I've got this good desire that I feel good about. I'm proud about it. I'm proud to be a good husband. And so I come home and I give my wife a big hug. And she shrinks away because she's had kids crawling on her all day. And the last thing she needs is somebody come saying, "Love me, love me, love me, love me, love me." I don't know if it sounds familiar to anybody. Um, and so let's say
Stop talking about me.
So let's say she shrinks away because that's just not what's loving in this moment, right? And I go, wait a minute, I had a good desire. I was just trying to be a good husband, and you're just rejecting me being a good husband. You're rejecting love. So what's wrong with you? So give me a hug. So that's where my desire, if I'm judging and I'm not curious, my desire becomes a demand. So I go, you should let me hug you. You should actually appreciate that hug. I've had a hard day too, and it's not easy for me to come and give of myself to hug you. and so how many of you are seeing that this really is more about me? So when my demand isn't met, then I move into judgment. And the reason I can justify my judgment is because wanting to be a good husband is a good desire. No one can argue with that. So I can hang on to that good desire and say, I am justified in my judgment of you. So my if I'm being a good husband, then there's only one other solution to this, or only one answer that why there's a problem is that you're not being a good wife. So I cast that judgment, and I feel great about myself because I'm just trying to, take the high road, trying to be the bigger person here and be loving. And then my judgment, if it's not effective, then I take action based on that judgment because my demand wasn't met, and my demand was only coming from a sincere, loving desire. And and so that action I take is, rather than help out with dinner and maybe clean up some dishes or help get the kids to the table or whatever, I'm going to go watch football, and you can do your thing because obviously you don't want me around. And so now I'm passive aggressively punishing. And it all started with a desire that wasn't met. So if my desire was to be a loving husband, if my true desire was to be a loving husband, would I have gotten this far? No. My desire was to be acknowledged as a loving husband. whether I am or not. And so think about situations you've been in where your desire was more about to just be acknowledged as what you're trying to project versus actually being that. And that's where curiosity versus judgment is so important, because when we judge, we've entered into a space where we're not being authentically who we're trying to present ourselves as. But when we come in with curiosity, we're saying, okay, so if I were to come in with curiosity, I'd go, whoa, I wonder why she responded like that. And I could ask, did I do something wrong? And most likely she would say, no, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm just worn out. And so instead of me whirling around in my head about all the reasons, what she must be thinking or what she must be mad about or whatever, knowing, no, you didn't do anything wrong. I just don't want to be touched. Give me an hour. or if you really need that loving engagement, take the children. They need it. Let them crawl all over you for a little bit. Get all your lovings in. Good dad and husband. But that's not where that went, right? So important to be curious and not judgmental, or you end up on the couch watching TV all by yourself in your justification of your very good desire. Any questions on that? I don't know if I confuse things. If you mull over it for a while, most people find it's a very familiar scenario. So how do we avoid that when we are thinking through a conflict? The first thing we need to do is get perspective about what's really going on. And so how do we do that? We think about, in this conflict, what am I asking for? What am I expecting? So my expectations weren't met. What was I asking for? I was asking for actually someone to love me. I wasn't really looking to love someone else. I was, based on my response, we know I was saying, I've had a hard day and this is what would make me feel better. So now, why is that so important to me? Why is it so important? And when you start getting at those underlying values, then you can approach it a little bit differently. So if I were to ask these questions in that moment, if my amygdala wasn't so trained to go, whoa, what's your problem? If I were to start thinking through these things beforehand, and people who have, like, I would encourage you guys with the conversations that you dread in your home, with the things that just come up over and over and over again, I would go through a writing exercise and write down the answers to these questions. Because this helps your amygdala step back a little bit. It engages your prefrontal cortex, and then your corpus callosum has to start using both sides of your brain. I know I'm getting super nerdy here, but it has to use both sides of your brain to actually write and process information at the same time. So writing down the answers to these questions, you'll think of things that you've never thought of before, and they will seem super simple to you, and you'll be like, what? How come I didn't think about this way before? So what am I asking for and expecting? Why is that so important to me? Am I being consistent with my core values? And when I get right down to that, I could have communicated that and said, oh, I'm sorry. I've had a hard day and I could use some love, and just be vulnerable about the fact that I'm feeling really weak right now. It's amazing how that changes a conversation. When you say, I'm actually tired, I'm feeling really weak, I'm sorry I responded that way. Let's take a break and then come back to it. So those are some things to think through prior to a conflict, or when you know there's things that are just ongoing. The next thing to think about is, how have you contributed to the tension? I added a word, how, because you have. The question is, as stated, is have you contributed to the contention? And most people go right off the bat, nope. It's all the other person. But the real question is, how have you contributed to the tension? What assumptions have I made about this situation or about the other person, about my 3-year-old, about my wife, about the people I'm working with? What assumptions have I made that have already laid a foundation for negative expectations? How have my attitudes and actions really not contributed to a fruitful conversation? So my weakness, my tendency, and my wife will vouch for this, is to get snarky when I feel weak. I just get snarky, and I can be there's lots of terms. There's lots of terms for what I can be. I can get super snarky, and it just, when I'm defensive, and it goes downhill fast. And that's all on me. Things change so fast when I'm defensive and snarky. And so I have found in my life, it's like a superpower to not take things personal. And I can have people just as ornery as all get out. And when I've decided this isn't personal. And I've had, even in recent, like yesterday and the day before, I had 2 different text conversations with clients where I can work with a lot of ornery people sometimes. And they were really mean to me. And they were, and I started to respond, and I went, no, one was a text and one was a phone call. And I didn't respond. And just giving that 5 minutes, I got, I'm sorry. Thank you for being kind. I've just had a really hard day. And if I would have been snarky, because I can tear someone down super quick, that would have all went downhill. But just stepping back and going, I wonder, being curious, I wonder what's going on there. And just insisting this isn't personal. Even if they meant it to be personal, this isn't personal because I won't allow it to be. And then what impact have I had? If the outcome I was expecting, if I were to go back to the previous slide and look at my core values, what I was expecting, what I was asking for, have I contributed to that? Have I contributed to what I say my values are? Say my values are honesty, respect, peace in my home, collaborative relationships. Have my attitudes and actions made the impact that contributes to those things? Okay, so those are all things to think about before entering a conversation with somebody about this stuff. Now there's actually confronting the situation gracefully. Oh, look, that's the next slide. Confronting gracefully. So step 1, separate the problem from the person, especially if it's your loved one, spouse, significant other, child. As long as you see the person as the problem, you have an unreconcilable situation, because you can't control them, you can't change them, and the only way you can reconcile that, if you see the person as the problem, is to remove the person, and that's not legal. So you shouldn't do that. So separate the person from the problem, and once you do that, Imagine two people, and this is what I do when I'm working with a couple or anybody really. Two people on either side of the table, and there's this problem in the middle of the table, but they're facing each other. And so they're looking right over the problem, they're looking through the problem, and they're seeing each other. And they're connecting you with the problem. Well, if one of them decides they're going to move to the other side of the table, then they're both seeing the problem for what it is. And now they're actually approaching it from the same side of the table. So if you can mentally say, the person is not the problem, I'm going to switch sides of the table. I'm going to go sit next to them so we can talk about the problem being on the same team. The person is never the problem. Once you've done that, you're in a spot to affirm and acknowledge the relationship. Just to say, hey, look, I want to talk to you about this because I value the relationship. Because I value you as a son, a daughter, husband, wife. Because I want to see us be able to get something from this that's valuable. And to not let this keep us from the joy that we could be experiencing because we're afraid to actually navigate this. So affirm and acknowledge, I appreciate this relationship. I value this relationship, and I acknowledge that we're in a rough spot. I acknowledge that we have a problem, but I want to sit on the same side of the table and look at this problem with you. And then state the problem. Here's what I think the problem is. And own your part, which is that last slide about your assumptions, your attitudes, your actions. So here's what I think from my perspective, here's what I think we're dealing with, and here's how I understand I've contributed to that. And that's super powerful because without doing that, I picture a person, you've heard the expression, who put a bee in your bonnet. And somebody's got a bee in their bonnet, they're irritated, right? Well, imagine a little more gruesome picture of a motorcycle helmet full of bees. and all of the things that you kind of thought through, here's how I've contributed to this problem. Those things are all floating around in their helmet, and they can't hear a word you're saying. All they can hear is zzz, because they want to address these things. And if you're the first person to say, here's how I understand I've contributed to this, is there anything I'm missing? What you've done is just open up the helmet and let those bees out and made it possible for that person to start hearing what you have to say. And they realize, oh, this is not going to be the fight that I expected, that I thought it would be. Oh, we're getting close. I better move quicker through this. And then just state what you want. Go back to those core values. Here's what's important to me. Here's what I hope to achieve from this conversation. Here's what I want out of this. Here's how I propose we do it. What do you think? So, in thinking through conflict, what is it that you really want? You might say it's all about red curtains, but what's really important to you? What are you really getting at? Why do red curtains make you, the conversation about red curtains make you so upset? What are you protecting? Where is that sense of love and belonging anchored for you? What have I done to contribute to the tension in this situation? And then how are we going to confront this gracefully and come collaboratively to a solution? And conflict actually gives us, going back to opportunities, it gives us the opportunity to be collaborative and innovative. When we're judgmental, we're just divisive. So conflict will lead to war. or it will lead to innovation. And when we allow our brains to be in innovative mode and collaborative mode with other people versus being hijacked and fearful, then we allow the best parts of our brain to flow. And when we're doing that, we give space for others to do that too, because then they start to feel more safe in that situation. And we actually call them into our zone of collaboration. And it takes practice. It doesn't go perfect every time. But the more we remember it's not personal, it's never personal. Even if someone tries to make it personal, just insist in your own mind, I'm not going to let this be personal. Let's be on the same side of the table and look at this together. So we would like every conversation to turn out well. I would too. And I would say most of them do. Sometimes I practice what I preach. Most of the time. If not, what I find most helpful is reaching out. Like sometimes my wife's actually better at this than I am, is looking up articles and looking at just objective information about how do we approach this differently, or what's actually going on here, or what's psychology stuff. And I'm always super impressed because I'm usually playing Sudoku or something, and she's reading articles about how to actually improve things. So that's one way. Reach out to resources. Reach out to somebody you can trust. On my website, I've got videos, and I'm gonna link to these videos too on my website. I know the Family Partnership has these links to videos on their website, among many others that they've done that I hear have been awesome. But that's my website. I've got videos, and I've got dozens and dozens of articles about every type of conflict situation under the sun. And if you shoot me an email and let me know if there's something you'd like to learn more about, I'll write an article about that. Or we'll do a workshop about that. If I get enough people interested in something, then we'll do a workshop just about that. Or you can text me or call me. But this is what I do for a living, is just I work with people, I work with schools, I love doing these workshops because it's just all about sharing this information and creating a world where we can gracefully confront each other and really engage in loving and being loved courageously. And that's it for tonight. I think 4 minutes to spare. And I'm happy to take any questions. I know I just fire hosed you. You guys ready to go eat dinner?
Well, I have a million questions, but nobody wants to hear my voice anymore. So I'm just going to encourage everybody again to email JP, because if there is something that you feel like, oh, I wish he would have told me more about this, or I still kind of want to know this, I would love to have JP back. Otherwise, he's just going to be talking about whatever I tell him I'm interested in. But yeah, please email him and please tell him, because after all of this, I'm like, well, but this is easy to talk about with this, or it's easier to talk about with an adult, but with like a little one who's throwing a fit, or with a kid, like, okay. So yeah.
Duct tape.
No, really. No, this got my mind really racing about how I could do this with my kids. So, So thank you for giving us tools to use right now in our relationships, but also thank you for jumpstarting our brains to want to learn more.
Yeah. Remember to breathe.
Well, the rest of you have a wonderful evening. And everyone who's watching this recording, again, please just reach out to JP if you want to know more. And everyone in the chat is saying this was super helpful, and thank you. So I'm just going to voice that again. Thank you, JP. We
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
My pleasure. And feel free, there's lots of free stuff on the website, videos and articles that could be helpful.
Okay, the rest of you go have a wonderful evening, eat your dinner. I would say enjoy the sun, but it's a little rainy, so enjoy the wind and get those grades and work samples in, right? Okay.
Fly a kite.
Okay,
See you,
thank you
everybody.
guys.